would calculate the theories they had. They had astronomical theories, but could calculate those at the turn of a handle. So it would demonstrate how you could look ahead, say, what's the position of...
For 100 years, no one could figure out what the missing half of an ancient computer did. Then, AI cracked the code. What scientists discovered hiding in those lost gears will make your jaw drop. This 2,000-year-old machine could calculate things that shouldn't have been possible. Things we didn't invent again for another 2 millennia. When they finally rebuilt the front and saw what it displayed, historians went silent.
The first shock, because anything from ancient Greece simply shouldn't have gear wheels. These were precision gears with teeth about 1 millimeter long. And this was just completely shocking.
Because if the ancient Greeks had this technology, what else are we completely wrong about? The story begins in the spring of 1900, when a group of sponge divers from the small Greek island of Symi found themselves caught in bad weather. Their captain, Demetrios Kondos, had been leading his crew across the Aegean Sea on what should have been a routine expedition. But when storms forced them to seek shelter near a tiny rocky outcrop called Antikythera, situated between Crete and the Peloponnese, they decided to make use of the unexpected delay. Rather than simply waiting out the weather, they chose to dive and search for sponges in the unfamiliar waters below. What happened next would change our understanding of ancient technology forever. Kondos sent one of his most experienced divers, Elias Stadiatis, down to the seabed, dressed in the standard heavy canvas diving suit of the era. With its distinctive copper helmet, Stadiatis descended into the Mediterranean waters. When he reached a depth of approximately 45 meters, or around 150 feet, he encountered something that made his heart race with terror. Through the murky water, he saw what appeared to be human bodies scattered across the ocean floor, twisted together in grotesque poses. The scene was so disturbing that he immediately pulled his signal line and shot back to the surface, convinced he had discovered some kind of ancient mass grave. Captain Kondos, skeptical of his diver's panicked report, decided to investigate for himself. When he returned to the surface, he brought with him a piece of evidence that transformed fear into excitement. What Stadiatis had mistaken for corpses were actually bronze and marble statues, remnants of an ancient shipwreck that had been lying undisturbed on the seabed for over 2,000 years. The bronze arm that Kondos retrieved, green with centuries of corrosion, was proof enough that they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. This single discovery marked the beginning of what would become the very first organized underwater archaeological excavation in Greek waters. Word of the find spread quickly, and by the following year, the Greek Navy had joined the sponge divers in a systematic recovery operation. Over the course of several months, the team brought up an impressive collection of artifacts. There were life-sized marble statues, some still remarkably intact, fine glassware that had somehow survived the violence of the shipwreck and 2 millennia on the ocean floor, ancient coins that would help date the vessel, bronze sculptures showing the skill of ancient craftsmen, and countless other fragments of what had clearly been a ship carrying valuable cargo. By 1901, wooden crates filled with these treasures began arriving at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Archaeologists and museum staff carefully unpacked each item, cataloging and examining the haul. Among the spectacular statues and precious objects, there sat one item that attracted no attention whatsoever. It was an unprepossessing lump of corroded bronze, fused with rotted wood, and covered in limestone deposits from its long immersion in seawater. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than debris, perhaps part of the ship's structure or some mundane piece of equipment. No one gave it a second thought, and it was set aside with other less impressive fragments. The lump remained forgotten in storage until the 17th of May, 1902. On that day, a museum archaeologist named Demetrios Kondos was examining some of the less glamorous finds from the Antikythera wreck. As he looked more closely at the corroded mass that had been dismissed as worthless, something caught his attention. Through a crack in the incrustation, he could see what appeared to be a bronze gear wheel with carefully cut teeth. This was no random piece of ship hardware. It was part of a machine, and it was clearly ancient. The discovery of that single gear opened up one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. What Stace had found would eventually be known as the Antikythera mechanism, and it would challenge everything historians thought they knew about ancient Greek technology. The initial questions were basic but profound. What was this device? What did it do? And perhaps most importantly, how could the ancient Greeks have built something so mechanically sophisticated? Researchers quickly established some basic facts about the find. The ship that had carried this mysterious object to the bottom of the sea had sunk sometime in the second quarter of the 1st century before Christ, probably between 75 and 50 BC. However, the mechanism itself was older than the shipwreck. Based on careful analysis of its construction, the style of its inscriptions, and various other factors, scholars eventually determined that the device had been built several decades before the ship went down. This meant the mechanism was more than 2,000 years old, created at a time when, according to conventional historical understanding, such complex machinery should not have existed. Today, what survives of the Antikythera mechanism consists of 82 separate fragments. These pieces represent roughly 1/3 of the original device, meaning that about 2/3 of the machine was lost, either destroyed in the shipwreck itself or eaten away by centuries of corrosion in the sea. Yet even in this ruined state, the surviving fragments preserve an astonishing level of mechanical complexity. Researchers have identified at least 30 interlocking bronze gear wheels within the remains. The largest of these gears measures a little more than 5 inches across and contains hundreds of teeth, each one carefully cut by hand with remarkable precision. All of these fragments are now housed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where they are displayed behind protective glass. Even after decades of conservation work, the pieces still bear the obvious scars of their time in the ocean. The bronze is green and pitted, the surface is rough with corrosion, and many edges are broken or worn away. Yet, these damaged fragments represent something invaluable. They are the only physical evidence we have, the hard boundary between what we know and what we can only theorize about. Every reconstruction, every hypothesis, every attempt to understand what this machine once was, must begin with these 82 pieces of corroded metal. The largest surviving piece, which researchers label as Fragment A, contains most of the gearwork that we can still see today. Other fragments preserve portions of what were once circular dials, complete with measurement scales. Still others show faint Greek letters carved into the metal surfaces, inscriptions that would eventually prove crucial to understanding the mechanism's purpose. For decades after Staius first spotted that gear, the fragments sat in the museum, examined periodically by scholars who could only guess at their full significance. The device was clearly some kind of calculating instrument, but exactly what it calculated and how it did so remained frustratingly unclear. The first real breakthrough in understanding the mechanism came in the 1970s, when early X-ray studies revealed previously hidden details within the corroded mass. These images showed that the internal structure was far more complex than anyone had suspected, with gears layered and interconnected in sophisticated ways. But the technology of that era could only reveal so much. The X-rays were two-dimensional, and the resolution was limited. Many details remained hidden within the bronze, and large portions of the inscribed text were completely illegible. The truly revolutionary advance came in 2005 when a joint research team from Britain and Greece brought cutting-edge imaging equipment into the museum. One of their machines was a 12-ton computed tomography scanner, nicknamed Blade Runner, which had been specially built in the United Kingdom for this project. This massive device could blast high-energy X-rays through bronze from multiple angles, creating cross-sectional images that could be stacked together to produce a complete three-dimensional view of the internal structure. For the first time, researchers could see gears that were completely hidden inside the corrosion, could count their teeth accurately, and could understand how they connected to one another. The second machine was a reflectance imaging system developed by Hewlett-Packard, designed to reveal surface details that were invisible to the naked eye. This system used carefully controlled lighting to bring out the faintest scratches and marks on the bronze surfaces. When applied to the Antikythera fragments, it revealed thousands of individual Greek letters that had been engraved on the metal plates. These inscriptions, barely visible, even with magnification, turned out to be operating instructions and astronomical data. After more than 2,000 years of silence, the machine was finally able to speak again, telling researchers, in its own words, what it had been built to do. The imaging work conducted in 2005 represented a massive leap forward, but it wasn't without its problems. the team had pushed their equipment to its absolute limits, trying to capture details at a resolution of just a few thousandths of an inch. At such extreme magnification, even the smallest imperfection in the scanning process could create significant errors. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. During the 2-week scanning session, roughly 1 out of every 4 high-resolution scan slices failed to record properly. Technical glitches meant that approximately 25% of nearly 3,000 individual scans came out unusable, leaving frustrating gaps in the data. To make matters worse, the fragments themselves may have shifted slightly during the long scanning process, creating blur and distortion in some of the images. These problems appeared precisely where researchers needed clarity the most. The highest magnification scans, which were meant to reveal individual letters and the finest gear teeth, were marred by stripes and missing sections. For years, scholars worked with this flawed data, doing their best to interpret what they could see while knowing that crucial information remained hidden in the corrupted sections. But in 2018, a team from University College London decided to return to the original raw data and try again. Using more advanced processing techniques, they painstakingly reconstructed the missing slices and corrected the distortions. The result was a significantly sharper picture. Previously unclear letters came into focus, contested readings gained certainty, and several key passages that had been debated for years were finally resolved. This might seem like a minor technical detail, but it mattered enormously. A single Greek character on these bronze plates could completely change how researchers interpreted an astronomical cycle. One letter could flip the meaning of a prediction from lunar to solar, or alter the timing of an eclipse by hours. When you're trying to understand a machine that hasn't worked in 2,000 years, and when you're attempting to rebuild the missing pieces, every letter counts. The inscriptions weren't decorative. They were specifications, user manuals, and mathematical tables all rolled into one. So, what did these readable portions actually reveal? The back of the mechanism, which survived in better condition than the front, provides the clearest picture. The upper section features a large spiral dial that winds around 5 complete times. This spiral tracks 235 lunar months, covering a period of 19 years. This particular cycle, known to scholars as the Metonic cycle, was crucial for ancient Greek calendars. The Greeks used a lunar calendar, where months followed the phases of the moon, but they needed to keep their calendar aligned with the solar year and its seasons. The Metonic cycle solved this problem by showing that 19 solar years equal almost exactly 235 lunar months. By tracking this cycle, users could predict when months needed to be added or adjusted to keep the calendar in sync. Nested beside this main spiral is a smaller subsidiary dial that counts 76 years, representing the Calippic cycle. This was essentially a refined version of the Metonic cycle, created by the Greek astronomer Callippus to improve long-term accuracy. While the Metonic cycle worked well for short periods, tiny errors would accumulate over time. The Calippic cycle, which is 4 Metonic cycles combined with a small adjustment, corrected these errors and kept astronomical predictions accurate over longer spans. The lower half of the back face contains another remarkable feature, a spiral dial marking off 223 lunar months. This represents the Saros cycle, one of the most important astronomical periods known to ancient astronomers. The Saros cycle was famous because it could predict eclipses with startling accuracy. Ancient observers had noticed that eclipses follow patterns, and that if you wait exactly 223 lunar months after one eclipse, another very similar eclipse will occur. This period works out to roughly 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. By tracking the Saros cycle, the mechanism could warn users when to expect eclipses months or even years in advance. But there's a complication with the Saros cycle, that awkward 8-hour remainder. After 223 months, the cycle doesn't end cleanly at midnight. It ends 8 hours later, meaning the next eclipse in the series will occur at a different time of day. This matters because an eclipse that happens during daylight in Greece might occur at night after one Saros cycle, making it invisible to observers there. The ancient engineers solved this problem by adding another small dial that tracked the exeligmos, which is 3 Saros cycles combined. After 54 years, the 8-hour remainders add up to 24 hours, exactly 1 full day, and the timing resets. This dial ensured that eclipse predictions remained precise over generations. The mechanism also included a small dial tracking the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, the great athletic festivals that rotated between Olympia, Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmia. This wasn't just a cultural touch. These games were so important to Greek society that they served as a method of timekeeping, much like how we might refer to Olympic years today. None of this is speculation or educated guesswork. These functions are directly described in the inscriptions carved into the bronze. When researchers examined the Saros spiral more closely, they found that each position that might contain an eclipse carried a small symbol, essentially a compact note, written in abbreviated Greek. These glyphs are remarkably detailed and practical. A single letter indicates whether the eclipse is lunar or solar. The Greek letter sigma stands for Selene, the moon, while the letter eta represents Helios, the sun. Next to this, a symbol that looks rather like an anchor, but is actually a combination of the Greek letters omega and rho, means hour. Following this symbol is another letter representing a number, indicating the time of day when the eclipse would occur. The glyphs also include phrases specifying whether the eclipse would happen during the day or at night, crucial information for determining whether it would be visible from Greece. Beneath each glyph sits an index letter that points users to a separate block of explanatory text carved elsewhere on the mechanism. These longer texts provided even more detail, describing which direction the shadow would come from, how much of the sun or moon would be covered, and even what colors observers might expect to see during the event. Imagine turning the crank on this device to advance it to a particular month, seeing the dial flag of an upcoming eclipse, and then being able to read off not just that an eclipse will occur, but its type, its timing, its visibility, and its characteristics. For a device built in the 1st century BC, this level of detail is breathtaking. The inscriptions also reveal something about the mechanism's origin and cultural context. In 2008, a major study of the text on the back identified the complete set of month names inscribed on the Metonic dial. These names didn't match the well-known Athenian calendar that scholars were familiar with. Instead, they belonged to what's called the Corinthian family of calendars, which were used in the western regions of Greece. Further analysis suggested the month names most closely matched the Epirote calendar, possibly connected to the colony of Ambracia. This is significant because calendars in the ancient world were intensely local. Different cities used different month names, started their years at different times, and organized their festivals according to their own traditions. By engraving those specific month names, the maker of the mechanism essentially signed the device with its civic identity. This wasn't a universal astronomical calculator. It was built for a specific community, probably in northwestern Greece. The front of the mechanism presents a much greater challenge because so much of it is missing. The gears and plates that once stood proud of the main frame are gone, swept away by the shipwreck or dissolved by corrosion over the centuries. What remains are fragments of the cover plates, the bronze sheets that once enclosed the mechanism's face. Yet these covers, damaged as they are, carry inscriptions that turned out to be absolutely crucial. In 2016, researchers published a detailed study of what they called the front cover inscription. These texts are not poetic descriptions or philosophical musings about the cosmos. They are precise technical specifications, lists of exact numerical relationships for each of the 5 planets known to ancient astronomers. The inscription deals with Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, listing for each one a specific set of astronomical periods. These periods describe how many synodic cycles, meaning the time it takes for a planet to return to the same phase relative to the Sun, equal whole numbers of years and complete revolutions through the zodiac. In practical terms, these inscriptions lay down the mathematical ratios that any planetary display mechanism would need to reproduce. When the text states that after a specific number of years, a planet completes a precise number of synodic cycles and zodiacal revolutions, it's not offering a hint or a suggestion, it's providing a requirement. Any reconstruction of the missing front gears must be able to generate exactly these ratios. This is what makes rebuilding the lost half so challenging and so constrained. Researchers aren't free to imagine just any arrangement of gears they like. They can't simply design a pretty display of the planets moving through the sky. The surviving gearwork shows what construction techniques the ancient builders had available and were willing to use. The inscriptions dictate which specific mathematical periods must appear in the mechanism's output, and the physical space available within the bronze frame sets hard limits on how many gears could fit, how thick the mechanism could be, and where shafts could pass through without colliding with other components. A viable reconstruction has to satisfy all three of these constraints simultaneously. It must be mechanically feasible using ancient Greek technology. It must be mathematically accurate to the periods specified in the inscriptions. And it must be spatially possible within the dimensions of the surviving frame. This triple constraint is what separates serious reconstruction attempts from fantasy. You can't just add gears until the math works out, because you'll run out of space. You can't just make it fit within the frame if the gear ratios don't match the inscriptions. And you can't ignore the evidence of how the Greeks actually built things, using techniques and tools that leave specific traces in the bronze. Every proposed reconstruction is a balancing act between these three unyielding requirements. And that's precisely what makes the challenge of rebuilding the missing front so fascinating and so difficult. The missing front half of the Antikythera mechanism wasn't pieced together through guesswork or imagination. It required careful, methodical engineering work. Step by step, researchers took the hard facts that were already established, things like gear counts, tooth sizes, surviving inscriptions, and the actual physical bronze framework, and used them as inputs to reconstruct the half that no longer exists. This wasn't a case of simply drawing what might have been there. It was about proving what could have been there, and then demonstrating that it would actually work. Before anyone could even begin rebuilding the gears, artificial intelligence played an unexpected role in clearing the path forward. A machine learning model called Ithaca, created by the research team at DeepMind, was designed specifically to help restore damaged ancient Greek inscriptions. When working on its own, Ithaca can predict missing letters, with about 62% accuracy, which is impressive, but far from perfect. However, when the model works alongside human historians, combining computational pattern recognition with human expertise and contextual understanding, the accuracy jumps dramatically. Human scholars working alone typically achieve about 25% accuracy when filling in gaps in damaged texts, but with Ithaca's assistance, that figure rises to over 70%. This matters enormously for the Antikythera mechanism because the numbers carved into the cover plates are the exact targets that any front reconstruction must hit. Getting those numbers right, being confident about whether an inscription says 5 or 50, whether it specifies one cycle or another, these details directly constrain what's possible. Cleaner and more confident readings of the inscriptions narrowed down the design options significantly, reducing the amount of guesswork and tightening the path that engineers had to follow. The first person who truly demonstrated that the front could be more than just a theoretical concept was Michael Wright in the early 2000s. Wright, who was then a curator at the Science Museum in London, didn't just draw diagrams or write papers about possibilities. He built actual working models with his own hands. His contribution was introducing epicyclic gearing to the reconstruction, a technique where small gears are mounted on arms that orbit around larger gears. This arrangement creates the non-uniform motion that planets display in the sky, speeding up and slowing down as they move through their cycles. Wright also made use of what's called a pin and slot device, an elegant mechanical solution where a pin moving inside a slot forces a follower gear to speed up and slow down smoothly. Ancient Greek astronomers knew that planets didn't move at constant speeds across the sky. They observed that planets appeared to change velocity, sometimes moving quickly through the constellations, sometimes slowing down, occasionally even appearing to stop and reverse direction. Wright's mechanisms could replicate these irregular motions using purely mechanical means, techniques that would have been available to ancient craftsmen. Wright even went so far as to build a complete planetarium model, and he did this well before the front cover inscriptions were fully deciphered and understood. His layout wasn't perfect, and later, work would refine and change many of his design choices, but he accomplished something crucial. He moved the entire debate from the realm of maybe this was possible to a concrete demonstration of yes, we can actually do this. His brass models, which visitors could see and watch in operation, proved that the front face could indeed display planetary motions using techniques that fit within the ancient Greek technological toolkit. Later, teams built firmly on Wright's foundation. The decisive breakthrough came in 2021, when a University College London team unveiled what they described as their model of the cosmos. This wasn't a beautiful rendering or an animated simulation. It was a complete architectural design for the front face that had to obey strict rules. The design had to fit inside the physical clearances that remained in the surviving frame. It had to reproduce the exact integer period relations that were carved into the inscriptions. And it had to allow multiple shafts and tubes to pass through the central area without colliding with each other or blocking other components. At the heart of this 2021 design sits a small dome representing Earth, surrounded by the mechanism that displays the Moon's position and phase. Around that central core, the planetary gear trains are arranged so that their outputs all feed into a bundle of thin nested tubes at the center. The research team called this arrangement the central coaxial output, and it forms the backbone of the entire system. This design choice is critical because it allows multiple displays to share the same central hub without crashing into each other. Each planet's gear train can independently calculate its position and then send that information through its own tube to a pointer on the front face. The face of the mechanism in this reconstruction is organized as a series of concentric rings rather than a jumble of overlapping pointers, all competing for space on a single flat dial. This might sound like a cosmetic choice, but it's actually functionally important. Rings reduce what's called parallax error, the difficulty of reading multiple hands stacked on top of each other, where your viewing angle affects which hand appears to line up with which mark. The ring arrangement also matches what the surviving user manual text says about a cosmos displayed in rings. The ancient inscription specifically describes the mechanism as showing the heavens arranged in circular bands, and the 2021 reconstruction follows this description literally. One of the smartest packaging decisions in the entire reconstruction was relocating the initial drive gears for the true Sun and the three outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. In earlier reconstruction attempts, these starter gears had been placed behind the large circular plate that forms part of the front structure. That placement always created a nightmare for designers because the gears needed to reach around the plate to connect to other components, requiring awkward brackets that added thickness and complexity. These brackets seemed unlikely for ancient builders who were working with limited space and trying to keep the mechanism as compact as possible. The University College London team solved this problem elegantly by moving those initial drive gears to the front of that plate instead of behind it. This single change opened up substantial space, eliminated the need for awkward brackets entirely, and gave each planetary gear train a clean, direct path to the central output system. At the dead center of the mechanism sits a fixed gear that doesn't rotate. Several of the planetary mechanisms use this stationary gear as an anchor point, with compact epicyclic assemblies riding on it. This kind of solution only emerges after weeks or months of virtual layouts that keep crashing into themselves, where designers keep trying different arrangements until suddenly one configuration works and everything falls into place. Part of what makes this layout so efficient is extensive gear sharing. Instead of designing each planet's mechanism from scratch with its own complete set of gears, the University College London team let several gear trains borrow and share key components. The mechanism that calculates the true Sun's position shares a specific gear with the Saturn mechanism, and both of them use the same fixed central gear that anchors all three of the superior planets. Mars and Jupiter share another gear in their respective trains. This kind of component economy is absolutely essential when the available space is measured in tenths of an inch. Every additional axle adds thickness to the mechanism, and every new wheel risks colliding with neighboring components. By sharing gears wherever possible, the model stays thin and tight, fitting within the physical constraints of the surviving bronze frame. The reconstruction also had to respect a physical skeleton that's preserved in one of the large surviving fragments. This skeleton consists of the main drive wheel with its 4 spokes and sets of pillars around its rim. These pillars once supported 2 plates at different heights, a rectangular plate mounted on shorter pillars and a circular plate mounted on longer ones. The University College London design treats this framework as a sandwich, packing multiple layers of gearing into the available gaps. Between the large drive wheel and the rectangular plate, they fit 9 closely stacked layers of gearing into a space measuring about 0.6 of an inch. This cramped zone houses the mean sun drive, the lunar node mechanism, and the base components of the gear trains for the inner planets. Between the rectangular plate and the circular plate, they squeezed most of the gearwork for the true sun and the outer planets into a gap of just under 4/10 of an inch. The fact that the rectangular plate sits at an 11-degree tilt relative to the spokes isn't an error or a compromise. It's actually a blessing, because that angle gives the epicyclic components for Mercury and Venus just enough clearance to slip past their neighbors without interfering. This is precision packing at the level of fine watchmaking, where every measurement matters and where fractions of an inch determine whether the design works or fails. One of the most satisfying detective moments in the entire reconstruction comes from understanding a small block on one of the spokes that has a mysterious hole drilled through it. For years, nobody could explain what this hole was for, or why it was positioned exactly where it is. The 2021 architecture finally solved the puzzle. The small sphere that displays the moon's phase on the front face needs input from both the sun and the moon to show the correct appearance. But if the front face is built as a series of rings as the inscriptions suggest, designers don't want to duplicate the entire sun calculation just to drive the moon display. The University College London design routes a feed from the mean sun mechanism through a bar attached to that pierced block. It's the shortest possible bridge across the fixed central gears to reach the lunar phase device. Suddenly, the block isn't a puzzle anymore. It's simply a mounting bracket with a clear mechanical purpose. The Venus mechanism provides another satisfying moment of recognition. A small fragment labeled Fragment D preserves a disc riveted to a gear, with a shaft that changes shape from square to round as it passes through a plate. The gear has 63 teeth, with all but 3 still intact, so the tooth count is essentially certain. In the University College London model, that disc carries the offset pin needed for a pin and slot follower, the mechanism that creates Venus's characteristic irregular motion as it speeds up and slows down in its orbit. The plate becomes the bearing surface at exactly the right height in the mechanism's structure. The fit is so precise that the researchers argue Fragment D's components are actually the epicyclic core of the Venus gear train, sitting exactly where the reconstruction predicts they should be. Under the surface, the designers kept each planetary gear train as mathematically lean as possible. The true sun mechanism uses just 3 gears. Each of the superior planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, runs on a compact 7-gear epicyclic set. The inner planets, Mercury and Venus, use 5 gear trains combined with pin and slot followers to create their distinctive stop-and-go motion, where a central component needs an additional feed but the direct path is blocked by fixed gears. The team uses pierced blocks and crossbars to route the power around obstacles. These are the kinds of small, stubborn fixes that real mechanisms demand when theory meets physical reality. What makes this 2021 rebuild genuinely credible is that it can be tested and challenged. In 2025, another research team ran computer simulations of the reconstruction to see how it would perform under realistic conditions. They used triangular tooth profiles, the sharp-edged style often seen in modern replicas of ancient gears, and then deliberately added small manufacturing errors to see what would happen. The results carried a warning. The tooth shape itself wasn't necessarily a problem, but if the spacing between gears was off by even the small tolerances sometimes suggested for ancient work, the system could jam after extended use. That finding doesn't mean the 2021 model is wrong. It just raises harder, more practical questions. What tooth profiles did Greek craftsmen actually cut? How precise were their measurements? How smooth was their bronze casting? These are questions about friction, spacing, wear, and manufacturing tolerance, the everyday concerns of real engineering that can now be measured and tested. The very first thing visible on the front face would be a small dome at the center representing Earth. Ancient Greek cosmology placed Earth at the center of everything, with the heavens rotating around it, and the mechanism faithfully reflects this worldview. Wrapped around that central Earth dome, a pointer shows the moon's position as it travels through the 12 signs of the zodiac. Next to that pointer sits a small sphere, roughly the size of a marble, painted half black and half white. This little ball rotates day by day to display the moon's current phase. When the dark half faces forward, it shows a new moon. When the bright half is fully visible, it displays a full moon. Every gradual transition between these extremes plays out on that tiny sphere, giving users a visual representation of what they would see in the night sky. But the moon is only the beginning of what this face displays. Surrounding the central Earth and Moon system are 6 thin rings, stacked one after another in concentric circles. Each ring carries one of the moving celestial bodies that the Greeks carefully tracked. Mercury occupies one ring, Venus another, then the Sun, followed by Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn on the outermost planetary ring. Each planet is marked by a small bead fixed to its ring, and these beads slowly move around their circles as the mechanism's gears turn. The Sun receives special treatment with a golden bead that has its own pointer, exactly as the ancient inscriptions describe. Beyond all the planetary rings sits the wide zodiac circle, divided into its 12 familiar signs, and beyond that lies a calendar ring showing the days of the year. None of this arrangement is guesswork or artistic interpretation. Inscriptions discovered in 2016 describe the front face in precisely these terms, and the 2021 reconstruction followed those ancient words as closely as possible. Together, the surviving texts and the modern engineering work confirmed that this front display showed 9 different pieces of information simultaneously: the moon's zodiacal position, the lunar nodes, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the calendar date all appeared at once, readable with a single glance. The Sun's golden bead glides steadily around the zodiac ring as the year progresses. When it crosses into the first degree of Aries, spring begins. When it reaches Cancer, the summer solstice arrives. At Capricorn comes the winter solstice, and at Libra, the autumn equinox. All of this seasonal information becomes visible at a glance. Standing in front of the mechanism, a user wouldn't need a separate calendar or astronomical table. The Sun's position alone tells them what season they're in and where they are in the year's cycle. Each planet tells its own story on its designated ring, and these aren't abstract representations. They display the same astronomical milestones that ancient observers cared deeply about. Each ring carries markers for specific events. Conjunctions occur when a planet disappears into the Sun's glare. Oppositions happen when outer planets stand directly opposite the Sun in the sky, rising as the Sun sets. Greatest elongations mark the moments when Mercury or Venus swing farthest away from the Sun, becoming bright evening or morning stars. Stations are the points where a planet appears to pause in its path through the constellations before reversing direction, a phenomenon called retrograde motion. There's also a special pointer sweeping across the dial that doesn't represent a planet at all. Ancient sources called it the dragon hand, a long serpentine pointer that tracks the moon's nodes. These nodes are the 2 points where the moon's orbital path crosses the Sun's path through the sky. Ancient astronomers often described eclipses using the metaphor of a dragon swallowing the Sun or moon, and this pointer embodies that imagery. The dragon hand drifts slowly across the zodiac, completing one full circuit in roughly 18.5 years. When it slides beneath the Sun's bead and enters one of the triangular warning windows marked on the dial, the mechanism is signaling that an eclipse season has arrived. Putting it all together, here's how someone would actually operate the device. First, they would set the calendar ring so it aligned properly with the zodiac circle. Then they would turn the handle forward, advancing the mechanism day by day until reaching the date they wanted to examine. At that point, they could read multiple pieces of information simultaneously. The golden bead showed the Sun's location and, therefore, the season. The moon's painted sphere displayed its current phase. Each planet's bead revealed its position in the sky and which phase of its cycle it was experiencing. If the dragon hand sat beneath the Sun within the triangular warning zones, an eclipse season was underway. In one moment, with one glance, a user could read the entire sky, past, present, or future, as far forward or backward as they cared to turn the handle.